Thank you for having me. Again, my name's Danielle. I wanted to frame this talk with this quote. I'm not sure if you can read it, but it's by Nayyirah Waheed. It's actually a poem that I found on Instagram the other day. And it says, would you still want to travel to that country if you could not take a camera with you? A question of appropriation. So for me, I think that this is a really important thing to be thinking about because a camera can do so many wonderful things, but the camera can also do so many things that, damage. So something to think about is the photographer's gaze. Is our gaze extractive or is it compassionate? How are we looking through the camera? And so for me, why I'm thinking about this constantly is because I'm working with communities all around the world, traveling constantly and often in communities that are not my own. And so I'm often asking myself, why am I doing this? Am I the right person for this? Am I taking or am I giving back? And what is my gaze saying? And so why does this matter to me? This matters for so many reasons. I mean, the work that I do is constantly towing the line of, telling other people's stories. And when you're telling other people's stories, you're taking on a great responsibility as a photographer. So at Photographers Without Borders, what we do is we try to make storytelling more accessible to grassroots organizations, communities, causes, not-for-profits all over the world. And oftentimes what we find is when we're working with these NGOs and communities is that they're tackling problems that are largely rooted in colonialism, capitalism, and empiricism. And so a lot of these problems that we're dealing with, like human trafficking, land and water protection, conservation of all different sorts, we work with a range of issues under the umbrella of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And so up till now, a lot of these problems are actually dealt with really neo-colonial solutions under institutions that have special interests and things like that. And so it's really important to think about these things. And when I talk about colonization, I'm talking about the settling of land and amongst people, but not just land and bodies, but also colonization of the mind. Or we take on this mentality that's really about extraction and control, where we're not really giving anything back, like I said earlier. And so this colonized mind, how it impacts storytelling is when we're going into different communities, whether they're abroad or whether they're here, or telling stories about anyone, we have this risk of perpetuating stereotypes, perpetuating poverty porn, making assumptions, and sometimes having this kind of white savior complex, and different kinds of savior complexes. And one of the things that's a real pain point for me actually is going on Instagram again, is creating captions and applying a narrative or a context to any of the images that I'm posting online. Because just creating a context or even not having a context can paint all sorts of pictures. And so I like this quote. Until the lions have their own historians, history of the hunt will always glorify the hunter, by Chinua Achebe. He's a Nigerian poet and writer. And I think this is so poignant because we need storytellers of all different kinds. A lot of people who are able to do photography are very privileged. Just being on that other side of the camera is a privilege in itself, and it holds a lot of power and responsibility. There's a quote on this slide. It says, "To have our lives determined by our dreams of a free world instead of reactions to state-imposed realities is one of the dreams of decolonization." And what that means is that we need to be able to paint pictures of a future and paint pictures of possibilities instead of painting pictures that limit possibility and perpetuate stereotypes. And so this involves decolonizing the mind when we're going out and doing storytelling, and being aware of the fact that we're creating knowledge while we're creating photos. So how do we do this? Photographers Without Borders largely works with, again, grassroots organizations, and we work strongly to create relationships, because I think at the core of everything is about relationships. Relationships to people, land, beings, whether your subjects are animals or humans. How we relate to these things really makes a difference. And working with NGOs is wonderful because they can decide the narrative, and they have been steeped in their communities, and they have knowledge that, sometimes coming as an outsider you don't have. And so a few tools that I'm going to impart upon you just when you're going about your storytelling work to think about. I mean, we talk about allyship a lot. I think that's really important. Being aware of your privilege and where you stand before going and telling stories is really important. But also beyond allyship is this thing called being an accomplice. And this is where, you're really willing to stand alongside the people that you're working with, rather than just kind of like helping push forward. There's not enough time to explain all these things. So a lot of the time, well-intended people, they want to work with us. They say they want to give people a voice who don't have one. But we don't like that kind of language. Language is really important. We talk about amplifying voices. People have voices, but there are certain oppressive structures in place that privilege certain voices over others and prevent other voices from being heard. So it's really important to be aware of that. It's really important to do no harm, physically, mentally, or emotionally, and there's ways we can do that directly or indirectly. Again, no time to talk about that. But just to put that in your minds and to think about always going about your work with dignity and respect for whoever you're working with. Accurate representation is really important. So just being aware of personal bias, because it does exist. And going about things in a way where we're avoiding fetishization, exoticization. And unfortunately, that's a really easy thing to do in this work. So other things that are really important are to take nothing but photographs and leave nothing but footprints. And we also do not encourage our photographers to take selfies with animals or wildlife. That's a really tough one sometimes, but the narratives that we promote, if we're promoting being cuddly and close with animals that are endangered, then we're actually promoting that to other people and saying, hey, you should do this. So we ask people to think twice about those things. So lastly, I'm going to leave you with this quote. We cannot fight for our rights and our history as well as future until we are armed with weapons of criticism and dedicated consciousness. So this is something I just want to leave everyone with. I think we can do so much better as storytellers, and I think we're all going to be great together going forward with these tools.